Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in Joshua, and we're going to be starting chapter 9 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, chapter 9 it's the chapter where the Gibeonites make a treaty with the children of Israel. And this chapter concerning the treaty that Israel made with the Gibeonites brings up a number of lessons that we today can learn. The first lesson is this, that Joshua and the children of Israel, they made their decision based upon their own wisdom and by the sight of their eyes. You know, Satan will always appeal for you to make your own decisions and to judge by what you see and by what you hear. This is exactly what Satan did with Eve. The lusts of the flesh, the pride of life, and the lust of the eyes. Isn't that what it is? 1 John 2:15-17. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, it is what? It is not of the Father, but it is of the world. And this world passes away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. The second lesson that we learn from this passage is that Joshua never bothered to ask God for his counsel. Probably because what they saw seemed to be so obvious that God didn't need to be asked. They never even considered that they were being lied to. We need today to learn to take everything to the Lord. Why? Because things may not really be what they seem to be or what they look to be. We think things are so obvious. Well, this has to be the way it is. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe they're lying to you. The third lesson is this. The Gibeonites used sin, the sin of lying, so that they might get something good. The unsaved world today thinks that the ends justify the means. If we commit this sin, it will result in something good. Christians are not supposed to take this approach to life. God is a God of truth and of righteousness. If we compare what the Gibeonites did with what Rahab did, we see that Rahab humbled herself to God and was exalted by God. But the Gibeonites, as we will see in verse 23, they had to be humbled by God, and they were made slaves for the Jews and for the tabernacle. So it didn't come out right. There's a difference between Rahab's humbling and the humbling of the Gibeonites. Christians are not to use sin in any form to further the gospel. And I think sometimes we're tempted to, but we can't. Just listen, just speak the truth and let God deal with the truth in people's hearts. Now, let's read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 9. And it says here, And it came to pass when all the kings which were on this side of the Jordan, in the hills and in the valleys and in the coasts of the great sea over against Lebanon, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, when they heard thereof, that they gathered themselves together to fight with Joshua and with Israel with one accord. Now, we see here kings of the hills. kings of the valleys, and kings of the seacoast coming together to fight against Israel. If it wasn't for, listen, if it wasn't for the presence of Israel, these kings would be in their own territory defending themselves against each other. But now Israel and their God is posing a threat to their very existence. These kings now, they put away their differences and they unite in a common desire to defeat Israel and to save their own lives. You know, it's interesting how those who were once natural enemies, how they band together and fight against the work of God. In Matthew chapter 22 and verse 16, we see the Pharisees and the Herodians, who were natural enemies. They joined forces against Jesus to trick him and to tempt him. When it comes to a work of God, Satan's forces will join together to fight against it. Now, 6 nations are named in verse 1. And 5 of those 6 nations are descendants of Canaan. And Canaan was the son of Ham, who was Noah's son, and who went in and looked at his father Noah's nakedness when Noah was drunk. So 6 of these 5 nations are descendants, direct descendants of Ham. Because of Noah's curse, Canaan and his descendants were to be servants to his brethren. Now, we see that in Genesis 10, verses 15 to 18, and Genesis 9, verses 24 and 25. So, Ham goes in, he sees his father's nakedness, and Noah wakes up the next morning, and he realizes what Ham had done, and instead of Noah cursing Ham, he curses Canaan and his grandson. And now these nations are the defense. And he said, when he cursed Canaan, he said, "You will be a servant of your brethren." It's interesting. The nations of the Perizzites is the only nation that is not known where their origination came from. The Perizzites, it's not known where they originated from. Now, in verse 2, it says they came together with one accord. Now, the Hebrew literally means one mouth. It means that they came together. These 6 nations came together and they discussed, and later they agreed to put away their differences and to go and to fight against Israel. But this is what churches around the world are supposed to do against Satan's king. Isn't that what the churches are supposed to do? Churches in each city around the world, aren't they supposed to come together and put away their differences and come together and pray and read the word and make the word of God their priority? Isn't that what they're supposed to do? Yes. Yeah. What we're seeing these 6 nations do is what the Christian church around the world is supposed to do, and they're not doing it. But instead, Satan has divided the churches and made them focus on their differences instead of uniting against Satan's workings in the world. This is why the Christian church is weak, because they won't put away their differences and come together. If churches would unite under Christ, you would see great changes for the cause of Christ. If churches would put away their differences then they could come together and pray. Some churches won't pray with other churches because of their beliefs. I'm not going to pray with that pastor or that church because I know what they believe. Well, and this again, Satan gets the Christian churches to focus on their differences. And that's why there's no unity, and that's why there's no power in cities and in towns and villages around the world. Verses 3 through 5, and it says here, and when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that Joshua had what he had done unto Jericho and unto Ai, they did work wily, and they went, and they made as if they had been ambassadors, and they took old sacks upon their asses, and wine bottles old, and rent, and bound up, and old shoes, and clouded upon their feet, and old garments upon them, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. Now, according to verse 17 of the same chapter, chapter 9, it seems that Gibeon was the main city or the capital city of the four cities mentioned. These four cities of the Hivites appear to have joined together as a republic, since there is no king mentioned, but they have elders. Read verse 11. Read chapter 9. We're going to get there in a little while. Chapter 9, verse 11. It doesn't seem that these four cities around Gibeon had a king. It seems like they just had elders. Later in history, the city of Gibeon would become a part of the territory of the Benjaminites. In Joshua 18 and verse 25, and listen, and later it would be one of the Levitical cities. Oh yeah, it would be one of the cities chosen as a Levitical. You're going to see why. You're going to see in Joshua 21 and verse 7. Yeah, it becomes a Levitical city. And in another lesson or two, you're going to find out why it seems that they became a Levitical city. Now, the deception of Israel by the Gibeonites can be seen as a kind of compensation for what was done to them by Levi and by Simeon. We're going to get into it now, actually. In Genesis 34. Genesis 34. Now, if you want, you can go and read Genesis chapter 34, and you're going to see what Levi and Simeon did to the Hivites. Yeah. And now we get into what's happening here now in Joshua 9. The Bible doesn't say that God was behind their trickery of Israel. But it seems like possibly God was allowing this, that God was actually allowing this to happen. Why? Because of the punishment that Levi and Simeon did to them 280 years earlier. If Levi and Simeon had slain all their king's sons, if they had slain only the king's son, then that probably would have been one thing. But they killed all the men in that city. They killed all the men in that city. It seems interesting that the city of the Gibeonites became one of the Levitical cities. Remember, the city of the Gibeonites will become a protected city because of the covenant that Joshua makes with them. Therefore, when the Gibeonites come, when it becomes a Levitical city, there will be Gibeonites, which are Hivites, living next to the descendants of Levi. When that becomes, as soon as Joshua and the children of Israel make a treaty with them, that's going to become a protected city. And you know what you're going to have in the future? You're going to have Hivites living alongside of Levites. 280 years earlier, what happened? Levi and Simeon go in and they massacre all these people, killed them all. Not all the people, I shouldn't say all the people. It was just the men. Oh yeah, they went in. They killed all the men because the son of the king raped their sister. Oh yeah. So now it seems like, was God for that? Obviously, it seems like God didn't like what Levi and Simeon did. God is seems that God is somewhat making compensation to the Hivites for what Levi and Simeon did. Therefore, this story about the Gibeonites may not only be about how they tricked Israel and how Joshua didn't bother to pray for guidance from God, but listen, but it may also be about God possibly looking after a people who had a great injustice done to them, and has the children of Israel actually to take care of them. Yeah. It almost seems possible God is setting up these people here so that instead of that, now the children of Israel are going to take care of them. Oh yeah, yeah. Because of what happened 280 years before. God's going to make sure these people are now taken care of. We're going to stop here, and we're going to continue on in verse 4 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.